Welcome to State of Play on Mint Press News, a bi-weekly geopolitical news show hosted by myself, Greg Stoker, a former U.S. Army Ranger turned anti-war activist. And I'm reaffirming that brief bio because today we are going to be talking about U.S. national security, its warfighting capabilities looking toward future conflicts, and the lessening of U.S. military power projection, all within the context of this intractable recruiting crisis. We have a lot of ground to cover. I know earlier today, the International Criminal Court just issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister of Israeli Defense Forces, Yoav Gallant. And we might touch on those with regards to U.S. moral credibility, soft power, and continued warmongering, which hurts, I would say, recruitment. But today we are joined by Major General Dennis Laich, U.S. Army retired, who had a distinguished 35-year career in the Army Reserve. The last 14 of those years were spent in various command positions, most recently as commander of the 94th Regional Readiness Command in Fort Devens. Leach holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Lafayette, a master's from West Virginia University. He completed postgraduate studies at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University and is a graduate of the U.S. Army War College. In areas of expertise, all volunteer force, demographics and trade-off, conscription, and national military service, senior level military leadership and general officer experience, and reserve and National Guard force structure and operations. Thank you so much for coming on, General. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So first of all, I've read some of your literature and your opinions and expertise on the ongoing intractable recruiting crisis. Going forward, we've all heard like whispers or rumors of it, but it hasn't really penetrated into the mainstream media. I have been searching for major outlets reporting on this issue that's been ongoing for, I'm not sure how many years, but it's been part of the conversation since I can remember over the past few years, but only no local news sources have been reporting on this. And I think a lot of Americans are kind of out of touch with this ongoing crisis. I'm just going to play a 1 minute and 50-second clip from a news station. Then I'd like to hear your commentary on that.
Military officials say fewer people are signing up to serve. The military will begin the new year with the smallest active duty force in more than 80 years.
Yeah, crazy numbers here. It's the lowest since about 1940. And this means a lot of questions for recruiters, like what's going on here? They want to know how the armed forces could increase their numbers for 2024. So turn on your sides, Kamaria Bray is in the control room breaking down more on why this could be happening. Kamaria.
The shortfall hits the Army, Navy, and Air Force. And the Department of Defense says military services missed recruiting goals by 41,000 recruits this year, and they want young people to enlist. The DoD says only 23% of young people 17 to 24 qualify to join the military. Physical fitness concerns, including obesity, stop some from joining, while others would likely not be able to join because of their criminal history or drug-related issues. And fewer young adults have no interest in it. Now, the government says some Gen Zers have low trust in institutions and fewer people in their family that serve. The DoD says another challenge is that military is in fewer places, so young people may not see service members in their community on a regular basis. Congressman Jim Banks, who is a veteran, blames lack of patriotism.
We're not telling kids in school that America is the greatest country in the history of the world, that it's worth fighting and dying for, and inspiring a new generation to serve.
On the other hand, the Marine Corps and Space Force made its recruiting goals. The Army has a program to help recruits qualify, and the Air Force has aviation camps where young people can experience service life. I'm Kamaria Bray, 10 on your side.
Well, hearing the a sitting member of the Armed Forces Committee saying that, you know, kids should want to fight and die for a country, it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of introspection over what happened over the last 20 years, the overseas contingency plans that were fought in West and Central Asia.
No, there hasn't been. And I should point out that in my book, which I wrote in 2013, Skin in the Game, Poor Kids and Patriots, with regard to the American view today, I wrote at that time that most Americans look at the military in general and the way we man the force in particular through a lens of fear, apathy, ignorance, and guilt. So we're seeing that in spades now. But the recording that we just watched was pretty accurate in that. When I wrote the book in 2013, 30% of the the recruiting age population met the minimum requirements for enlistment. Now it's down to 23%, and 15% had a propensity to serve. That's now down to 9%. So last year, most of the services met their recruiting requirements, but 2 years before, the Army was a total of 25,000 short. The Navy currently is 22,000 sailors short. The Air Force is 1,800 pilots short. And, we have an ongoing problem, but it's not only the number, but it's the quality of what we're looking at. The number of reasons for the failure was identified in the clip there. It failed to include the low scores on the ASVAB. And now we have some remedial work being done at Fort Jackson and Great Lakes. The Army and the Navy, the Army's has a what's called the Future Soldiers Program, where people who can't meet the medical or the weight and height requirements or the mental requirements are given remedial training. But there's a problem in that, and 25% of the enlistments came from that program last year. The problem in that is that creating problems down the road. It's a pretty strong medical history that if you've been overweight for an extended period and you lose the weight quickly, you gain it back. So that creates a problem down the road for the Army Weight Control Program. And the fact that you can take Cat 4s who score low on the ASVAB and suddenly after 3 or 4 weeks create a perfectly qualified soldier calls into question the integrity of the schooling or the integrity of the test. So there's a lot of problems going forward.
Yeah, and so just context for the audience, the ASVAB, which the general is referring to, is the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. Basically, kind of imagine it as an SAT that places you or qualifies you for certain jobs, MOSs inside the military. So you'd have to get higher for intelligence, engineering, and I was infantry, so I didn't have to get the highest ASVAB score, but that's all right. So it's also a lack of eligible recruits. But in your Newsweek article that I was reading, going through last night, you brought up that there is also, a distrust of military service. You write, quote, over the last decade, as you just mentioned, the prospect to serve has declined from 15% to 9%. In the United States has cultivated, quote, as you wrote, an image of war as easy and inexpensive, but despite a poor record of performance since World War II, the U.S. has tied in Korea, lost in Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan, and won the first Gulf War. A record of 1-3-1 cannot be viewed as a success. So I guess what are other factors that are you believe that are going into a lack of propensity to join the military and serve and perhaps conduct combat operations overseas?
I think we have an ongoing problem with suicides in the military, which is a major issue that hasn't been dealt with effectively. We have an issue of sexual violence in the military that hasn't been dealt with effectively. We have housing issues and spousal opportunities, spousal employment opportunities that have not been dealt with effectively. Healthcare. I don't know if I mentioned childcare. We also have housing issues. I mean, we're putting soldiers up in mold-infested barracks and substandard housing throughout the continents.
Yeah, and the benefits. One of the reasons I joined was for college, and college isn't really panning out the way, or college degrees aren't panning out the way they used to or were in the modern economy. And I think a lot of the kids are realizing that. Also, yeah, the suicide rate is. Whenever I talk to guys in their 20s who are thinking about joining the military, it's like the suicide rate is a main sticking point because it's just been so egregious over the global war on terror. And, they look at the VA healthcare and post-war veterans benefits and the healthcare system. And it all seems like one big mess. I mean, we give plenty of money to defense contractors, but it just seems like the pay isn't meeting inflation. They don't want to invest in any base infrastructure. And you also mentioned in this article that the all volunteer force is in decline, and that's been a conversation for a long time. And there's a lot of talk about a draft, and would that fix anything?
Well, it would fix something, but the thing is, it's not an all volunteer force. It's a borderline mercenary force. When you're paying $50,000 bonuses for a young 18-year-old who has no skills to come in and serve, it's what are they volunteering for? Are they volunteering for patriotism or volunteering for $50,000? You have you don't see many commercials that tout patriotism. It's tout benefits, and it's become transactional rather than patriotic.
And you see that as a threat?
That's the problem. But here's the other thing too. We're having a tough time in peace now, manning the military. What happens when we have a war? Everyone says that there will be a rush to the recruiting stations. Most people can't find Taiwan on a map. So if we were to go to war with China over Taiwan, well, what makes anyone think that there'd be a rush to the recruiting stations to enlist? It wouldn't happen, I don't think, because we have data right now that says that 3 principal reasons that people don't enlist is 1, fear of death, 2, fear of serious injury, and 3, fear of reluctance to leave home. So the first 2 are exacerbated in wartime. We can't recruit to sufficient numbers in peace. So the whole thing crumbles.
Yeah, I guess there are people still locked in the World War II or post 9/11 mentality. It's like we were under attack, so everyone's going to rush in. But I definitely feel like after 20 years of 2 low intensity conflicts that we eventually withdrew from, the zeal is not there at all.
Well, bear in mind that rush to the recruiting stations after 9/11 lasted for 4 to 6 months and then it dissipated.
Wow. No, I don't remember that. Okay. Yeah. Well, there was a lot of recruiting propaganda going around. I remember in my own unit when Pat Tillman got into 2nd Ranger Battalion, they really made a meal out of that. But yeah. So I guess one of the things is you believe we keep getting involved in these wars. The thrust of your argument was, and there's a bunch of lying that goes into it, a bunch of manipulation, a bunch of manufacturing of consent to get the public on board, also to get them to sign up for the military. And it's generally poor kids from trailer parks, what I generally call like the poverty draft in some ways. And, the legislators who send them to war, like their kids don't fight. I mean, we have a number of presidents who are straight up draft dodgers as well from the Vietnam era. And you were arguing, and it was an interesting argument, that a draft would make it more equitable and would somewhat fix some of these recruiting issues. If everybody had skin in the game, it would orient towards a less warlike footing.
I often ask audiences throughout the United States when I speak, if in 2006 or 2008 we had implemented a fair across the board draft, men and women, no deferments, no exemptions, how long would we have stayed in Afghanistan? Additionally, if we implemented a war surtax such that every quarter you received a bill from the IRS for your share of the cost of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, how long would we have stayed? Nobody has skin in the game other than the poor kids and patriots who fight and their families.
Yeah. I guess that was a main contributing factor to the Vietnam backlash. I mean, that war had 10 years of direct involvement with U.S. forces on the ground. But a big part of ending that, I believe, as someone who didn't grow up in that era, I mean, my father volunteered, but I think one of the big motivations was because they were actually getting sent, like middle-class working families who thought their kids were going to go to college. Nope. But I'm not sure, like, is a draft an actual possibility? I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment, but is it actually going to something that you see ever going to be implemented again?
Well, here's the thing. Everybody says it's a political non-starter. What's a political non-starter? Political non-starter is something that politicians don't want to do because it jeopardizes their job, because they're forcing their constituents to do something that they don't want to do. But they don't have a right to be reelected. They have a right. They have an obligation to serve the best interests of the country. And we might have fewer wars if we had draft. That placed in jeopardy the sons and daughters of the elites in the first socioeconomic quintiles rather than the third and fourth.
Yeah, but you do believe it's a political non-starter, or at least the political will doesn't exist right now, because I mean, I do follow a lot of Gen Z accounts, just to see what they're talking about. And there is an idea that because recent legislation was opened up to like register you. I forget what exactly it was, but anyways, there's this thought that the draft might actually be reinstituted.
Here's the thing. If first of all, everyone thinks about the draft in the context of the Vietnam draft, and the Vietnam draft was classically the worst, most unfair draft that we've had in the history of our nation. I mean, we had deferments and exemptions all over the place. We had political involvement. We didn't have a lottery. What if we had a lottery-based draft? Men and women, no exemptions, no deferments, with three options. One, you could go to the National Guard or the reserve components for 6 years. If you were mobilized and deployed in a war zone one time, your military obligation is complete. If you didn't want to do that, you could go to the active components, serve 2 years after basic and AIT. Your military obligation is complete. If you don't want to do either one and you want to go to college, that's great. You'll be in ROTC. And if you fail to get a commission in ROTC, you revert to option 1 or 2.
Yeah. And again, I do think that watching this past election, it seems to me that Americans as a whole generally don't base any of their votes on U.S. foreign policy. It's all domestic policy, and that's one of the reasons I think these wars were allowed to go on for 20 years. I mean, when I was 19, going through basic, I definitely kind of bought the Kool-Aid, but I was always I did it for my own reasons. It was actually way more mercenary than patriotic at the time, if I'm being completely honest. And so, yeah. And of course I've read like West Point papers saying like that is one of the main recruiting things, this, the inability to kind of exist easily in this society, especially if you're from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So an equitable draft would be interesting. Again, do you see this recruiting crisis, though, getting resolved and kind of reconstituting the efficacy of the all-volunteer force?
No, as a matter of fact, there's no reason to believe that the current trends are going to be they're going to turn up. That the move from 30% to 15% and the move from 15% to 9% in the propensity to serve, or the qualifications and the propensity to serve respectively, are going to turn up. The other thing that's going to happen in the next couple of years, there's going to be a 10% drop in the demographic pool of people in the recruiting age.
Oh, because birth rates.
Exactly. So if anything, it's going to get worse.
That kind of seems insane to me, because it seems like policymakers in Washington, these war hawks, we can talk about a couple of Trump's cabinet, President-elect Trump's cabinet appointees, but it seems like there's some, very irresponsible brinksmanship going on in the war in Ukraine, and very irresponsible brinksmanship going on over the Strait of Taiwan. Given this recruiting crisis, how does that impact what we're actually able to do? It seems like a lot of these politicians who are career politicians, and they grew up and they started cutting their teeth career wise in like the 90s. It seems like they think we still have the same kind of military influence, power projection that we had then. I personally, as not really an expert in this exact field, don't really see how they could be detached from that reality.
Well, this is where I say that the America has an alligator mouth and a chipmunk ass. You know, we have people who are the military industrial congressional complex, the chicken hawks and the neocons with the alligator mouth, and we have the chipmunk ass that says that we can't recruit sufficient numbers. We don't have the industrial base to replace equipment. And we're $35 trillion in debt. So if you don't have men, money, and material, how do you prosecute a war?
Well, that is not a lot of the political thought personally that I'm hearing coming out of Washington. Now, let's just play this quick video from our nominated Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, former. I think he was a major in the infantry, and he's now a Fox News anchor. And he is one of the people that I mentioned that have no self-reflection or introspection about what actually went on in the wars he fought in.
Ukraine. I could tell you what the end state is in Israel. And what's the only thing the American military and the American diplomats are doing right now? Trying to stop Israel from finishing the fight. Like, there's one thing that Israel could do. Kill every last one of those Hamas now, and then the war stops. And by the way, Israel didn't start it. Like, that's how wars end. That's how peace breaks out. For thousands of years, somebody actually wins the war. And when they win the war, then there's a new reality, a new geopolitical reality. We don't fight that way. We let the lawyers lead. We let international institutions have too much say. And it percolates. I tell stories directly as a platoon leader, down to can you shoot, can you not shoot? Are guys being criminalized after the fact, put in jail? I mean, Donald Trump pardoned a bunch of guys I advocated for in his last couple of years in office. They killed the right guys in the wrong way, according to somebody. I'm done with that. Like, we need to fight total war against our enemies when we do. And yeah, you don't kill civilians on purpose. But you kill bad guys, all of them. You stack bodies. And when it's over, then you let the dust settle and you figure out who's ahead. But it turns out we're the ones with the big guns right now.
We're the ones with the big guns right now. Okay, a lot to unpack there. Interesting SecDef nomination. Your thoughts, General?
I got his book, The War on Warriors, and it's frightening. One thing struck me immediately when I got it, when it was delivered to the house here. There are no blurbs. There are no endorsements on it. I think it was written for one reader, and the guy doesn't read, but he's Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. I think Hegseth is the military operates at three levels at least. Operates at the tactical, the operational, and strategic level. He may have some information and some background at the strategic level. I don't think he migrates to the operational. He certainly doesn't migrate to the strategic level. I think he's a nutcase, frankly.
I mean, yeah, I was wondering, what he was doing on division staff, just probably relegated to PowerPoint generation. But I just how speaking of the strategic level. When an appointment like this happens, I guess all the general officers in the military are looking towards who the incoming Secretary of Defense will be. Like right now, it's currently Lloyd Austin, who actually has a lot of experience at the strategic level. And of course, the general staff is not a monolith, but how do you see this impacting the actual senior leadership of the U.S. military, this particular appointment?
I don't think he'll make it, first of all, but I think that the nomination is alarming, mm-hmm. because I think that it shows a complete disregard for the discipline, the morale, and the cohesion of the military itself. I mean, how can this guy impose discipline on the force when there's a violation of UCMJ, when he advocated for the release of the special forces that admitted what they did. I mean, this is something that's crazy. He says that women shouldn't be part of the force. Women make up 24% of the military today. If it weren't for the military, if it weren't for women, the all-volunteer force would have collapsed 20 years ago. He talks about wokeness in the military. He goes on and on about it. there's no evidence that the wokeness in the military is a adverse consequence or an adverse impact on readiness and lethality. The guy he's an affront to good discipline and judgment.
So why do you think he was picked then?
Because he's a sycophant.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's just that simple. There's nothing in his background that would qualify him to be Secretary of Defense. Nothing at all. There's 2.3 million people who are part of the Department of Defense. It's an $800 billion budget every year. There's strategic alliances that the Secretary of Defense is part of. He has no skills in any of that, no experience. I mean, absent his sexual encounters and other personal flaws, I mean, the guy is not qualified. There's nothing in his background that qualifies him to be Secretary of Defense.
And so, aside from sycophancy, is there nobody at the defense establishment who's speaking to the incoming president about these things, about like advising him, like, because I know he's changed his rhetoric about Iran, and I've read like Brookings Institute and Rand Corporation like reports and think tanks that are very pro attacking Iran, and still it's not feasible from a military perspective. And I've done episodes on that, walking through those and the traditional thoughts surrounding that. But I guess the amount of hawks he's surrounding himself with is concerning. And what do you envision them accomplishing or trying to do? Because we literally cannot go getting into a shooting fight with Iran, which is a regional hegemon, with Russia, and definitely not with China. So is it all bluster?
Maybe into with all three. I mean, there's reason to believe that there's an alliance brewing between the three of them, and might include some others that weren't there before.
Yeah, I mean, since the outbreak of the war in Ukraine and the sanctions both placed on Russia and Iran, we're seeing a solidifying security relationship. North Korea is also in the mix. China with BRICS.
Providing tens of thousands of troops, North Korea is.
Yeah. So I guess given all of this, given the recruiting crisis, given the lack of our industrial base to even make enough shells for the Ukrainian front, artillery shells for the Ukrainian front, it just seems kind of insane. And maybe I'm naive in the fact that like, it has to be just rhetoric, right? Or are you actually concerned that this could become policy, that troops could be deployed? I know there's been some restraint exercised by the military in its de-escalation games with Iran over the past year, but I don't know, what would a Trump presidency mean?
I don't know, but it's not a matter of rational thinking. It's a matter of hubris on the part of some people too. I mean, there's a thought, the exceptional nation and all that stuff that we spout. The exceptional nation might be the exceptional nation based on genocide, slavery, and intergenerational theft. That's hardly a source of strength to take on current near peer competitors.
So if this is kind of an expansive question, but if you could explain to the audience just in simple terms, I guess why the United States, aside from like the recruiting crisis is obvious, but why the United States can't mobilize against an enemy like an adversary like China or even Iran?
Well, I think that first of all, the manpower. There are three things that I think are deficient. The manpower. We can't recruit to satisfy the peacetime needs. What would make us think that we can induce soldiers or civilians to enlist in a wartime army? The second one is that we don't have the industrial base. You mentioned the inability to provide 155 shells to Ukraine in a limited war in one part of the world. We can't build subs. There's the incoming head of the incoming senior leader of the SAC, of the Senate Armed Services Committee, wrote a op-ed piece a few months ago that said that the Navy ought to go from a 300-ship Navy to a 355-ship Navy. Well, first of all, they can't build them. Secondly, we don't have the money. And third, where are you going to get the sailors? I mean, we're $35 trillion in debt and adding $1 trillion a year or more. Who are we kidding?
Yeah, but I guess they're still going to try it. Well, when I start to think it would be insane, then I just remember the Iraq War, and I was like, oh yes, the same politicians, well, not all of them, but the same political apparatus and the same thought in Washington in terms of foreign policy still exists. And looking at the war in Ukraine, it doesn't seem like the Biden administration's in a game of brinksmanship right now. I mistrust Trump when he says he's going to like end the war, because I don't think he has that power anymore. And it just seems like we can't afford to back down in Ukraine, because then NATO would like lose credibility and power Russia, and we also can't stop supporting Israel now. And it seems like there's like we've gone too far. There's an element of sunk cost fallacy, and we can't be seen to be weak, because once we are, the game is up. So how do you feel about that assessment?
Well, you mentioned Israel. I think that we're sleepwalking our way into a war in the Middle East, and Israel is wagging the dog. You know, I often ask people that I deal with, what is the what benefit accrues to the United States from our quote unquote strategic alliance with Israel? It's nothing. We don't get anything out of it. But we're sleepwalking our way into a war here. You know, the Israeli government today is the most conservative, and it's an apartheid government. It's not a democracy anymore. I mean, there's genocide in Gaza. There's Israel is on a two-front war today. That they're looking for peace in the Hezbollah in Lebanon, because they can't. The IDF is under extreme pressure today. But you know, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and one of the most stark realities is that Israel laid out a bunch of operational and strategic objectives at the start, and they have accomplished 0 of them. And there's no end in sight. Ceasefires, both proposals are a pipe dream. Both, I believe, both with the one in Hezbollah and the one in Gaza. It's giving mission accomplished vibes. If the audience recalls when Bush landed on the aircraft carrier, and none of the stated goals in Iraq had been complete, and we still stayed there, and we're still there. So this will keep going on, and of course, they can't go toe-to-toe with Iran. There's a belief that the United States could, but fighting an imperial war across like a continent in the Atlantic Ocean, so far from our borders, and the shock to the oil market, it just, again, I'm kind of like bumping up against an ideological wall where I can't see it happening.
Well, I said we may sleepwalk our way into it. I mean, we're heading that way right now. I think one of the things, you know, when we talked before about how we end up in these wars, I think that you know, there ought to be a requirement that before we enter into any war, no matter how limited, Congress ought to be required to exercise their war powers. That they ought to declare war, and that before they do it, there ought to be an open debate on, and the debate should be surrounded or based on the 8 points in the Powell Doctrine. You know, we go to war, we don't have an exit strategy, we don't have a mission, we don't have anything that says that the American people are supporting it. If you look at the 8 points in the Powell Doctrine, and you say, what if we applied those to Iraq? Would we have gone into Iraq? I don't think so. I would add two things to it too. That Congress would be required to predict or project how many people will die in the war, and how and from what socioeconomic quintile they'll come. There's a book out called The Casualty Gap by 2 scholars that identifies that the casualty gap is getting more and more wide between the socioeconomic classes going back to World War II. As we move through the Vietnam War and Korea and the war on terror in the last 20 years, the gap is getting wider and wider. And the other one is that they ought to have to predict or project what it's going to cost. I think that tempers some of the war hawks.
Yeah, based off of what we saw, Peter Hegseth, who I obviously don't think is going to get confirmed unless it's through like a recess appointment, maybe. But we're not going to get into U.S. machine politics in this episode because I know a lot of you guys are listening from outside the United States.
Gates withdrew just a little while ago.
Yeah.
Nation.
Well, here we go. Should be an interesting 4 years at least, if nothing else. So. Yeah, and I don't think that the powers that be have a vested interest in explaining any of this to the people. And so, just for context for y'all, when was the last time the U.S. Congress issued a white paper to declare war? It was Korea, or was it actually just World War II?
World War II. Okay,
cool. So it's just been on executive authority since then, essentially. Well, checks and balances, am I right? So, what other impacts do you see a Trump presidency having on the military, just in a general way?
Well, I think that there's some credibility issues. I mean, when the commander in chief will say that any veteran is a sucker and a loser, it doesn't. That's not a good recruiting issue. When he says that when he disparages a Gold Star family, it's not a good recruiting issue. And and when he excuses convicted felons under the UCMJ, that's not a good message for the military. And if they have this board, they're talking about this board to
yes, I wanted to get to the purge the military board, as some people are calling it.
That's crazy. I mean, you have a loyalty oath that's to an individual rather than the Constitution.
Yeah, and so just for context, y'all, the Trump team leaked. It seems like they leaked this to the Wall Street Journal in order to see if they could get away with it, see what the public response would be. I mean, Trump's team does leak a lot of stuff, and so does every incoming presidential team, just to test the waters with incoming policy to see if they can get away with it. Anyways, there's supposed to be a review board of senior former military commanders who are loyal to Trump to assess the loyalty and the competence. I think they couched it in the language competence and expertise of general and flag officers. So generals and admiral. I think it's 3 to 4 stars, but it probably won't stop there.
3 and 4 stars, yes.
And I guess they're couching it under a conversation that's been going on, at least that I've been exposed to in military literature for at least like 10 years, that there are too many general officers, that there's something called rank creep. And they cite sources like there's one, general officer per 1,400 servicemen. Back in World War II, it was like 1 per 6,000. I don't really understand the argument, but that's how they're using it. Just like everything else the incoming administration is talking about, they're talking about like cutting funding, cutting people for the sake of efficiency, to blow through bureaucracy. Do you see that as a legitimate thing that they might actually be trying to do, or do you think it's more nefarious?
I think it's more nefarious. I think that there may be too many generals and there may be too many admirals. We may not hold them accountable as we should, but I think that it's more nefarious in that it's a means of bringing the military to heel and bringing it compliant with the administration and with Trump's views. But I've been critical of some of the criteria reviews. I mean, we had 17 or 18  4 stars to rotate through Afghanistan in that war. every one of them went in and said that, it's screwed up and I'm going to square it away. And as he was leaving, he said that, victory is just around the corner. The next guy come in and say the same thing. And when he left, he'd say the same thing. But we haven't held people accountable. I mean, when we go back to the beginning of this session, we talk about the war performance. I mean, we're people been held accountable for losing wars. Paul Yingling wrote a piece about 15 years ago. Paul Yingling was a bright young colonel who wrote a thing that where he said that an individual soldier is more accountable for losing a rifle than an American general is for losing a war. I think that's something that we ought to look at. We hold these people up in a pedestal and say that they're wonderful and everything, but I think there's a case to say that not enough people have been held accountable and delivered consequences.
And it's still that same kind of like institutionalized thought that we're seeing now. There's this obsession that we still having learned nothing from 20 years, that like, yes, you can assassinate Hassan Nasrallah in front of Hezbollah. You cut the head off the snake, it dies. I remember when we captured like Haji Mali Khan of the Haqqani network in Afghanistan, and like everyone got accolades, and we thought like this is really the turning point. We're going to roll up this whole ISI affiliated network that was operating in Afghanistan, and turns out didn't work. Like really didn't change the situation. There is an obsession with decapitation strikes. That's part of our I wouldn't say doctrine, but Western military thought. And it just doesn't exist for like a lot of these organizations that the U.S. and now Israel is fighting.
Well, let me give you a different perspective on that.
Okay.
Makes us think that taking out the head of the Hezbollah or whatever is going to be an issue and going to turn a tide, when every 12 months we change commanders.
Oh, wow. Okay.
What's the difference? What's the difference? Apply that standard to the question and then see what you can come up with.
Whoa. I had actually never considered that. Yeah, it's literally just a change of command.
Exactly.
Every professional military does it. Okay.
And then there's a more than enough qualified people who are hungry and want to take those positions in the terrorist ranks.
Right. So this will continue indefinitely. And again, recruiting crisis not gonna change as we've.
It's going to get worse.
It's going to get worse, and the zeal to join the military is not going to get better. Do you believe everything you've seen and heard? And were you still in the military under the first Trump presidency, General?
No, I've been retired since 2006.
2006. Okay. Do you believe that a lot of his supporters see him as an anti-war candidate, an anti-interventionist candidate? I'm circumspect about that. I was wondering what your impressions were.
I don't know. I wouldn't predict anything with regard to Trump. I think he's mercurial and transactional, and I wouldn't predict anything.
Understood. And of course, the Biden administration has been more violent than I expected, personally. But I think that's a separate issue. So going forward, how do you? Again, hard to predict anything going forward. I guess my last question is, if these recruiting issues can't be solved, first of all, do you think that they could reasonably, effectively, and practically be solved, especially in the context of, Trump is talking about deploying the military to enforce his deportation policies. Do you think, in the context of that, like U.S. service members would sign up to go be like roundup goon squads? And do you think that's something that will actually be put into action?
I think there will be some people who do that. I think there's some element of our society who would love to do that. I think that the mass of our society would not be willing to do that, and would run into some trouble. I think that it would be a big mistake to use the military in that regard. But I'd also say that with regard to the recruiting issue, there are two things that save the all volunteer force, and there's no. I don't know if there's maybe one more rabbit to pull out of the hat. And the two things that saved it is that we've used women to fill a lot of gaps, and 24%. I mean, when the ADF went in, women were limited to 2% of the military, no more than 2%, and they were limited to they go no higher than 06 in rank. That's one thing. The other thing that saved the AVF is the demise of the Soviet Union. When 1991, we had 2.3 million people on active duty, went down to 1.3 as a result of the decline of the Soviet Union. That was the peace dividend. What if we had to recruit to 2.3 million rather than 1.3? So I don't think there's maybe one more rabbit in the hat, but I don't think it's going to be one that is a big fix. I think that there will be a tendency, or there may be a tendency to use citizenship and foreign nationals as a recruiting gap, fill a recruiting gap.
Yeah, well, the use of foreign nationals reminds me of like late stage Roman legions. They couldn't recruit from the heartland anymore, so they had to go outside. And of course, there was loyalty issues and a lot of other issues as well. What do you think that rabbit that may still hypothetically exist to pull out of the hat to save the all volunteer force is?
I think the rabbit itself is the accelerated recruiting of foreign nationals into our military with the citizenship. And you're exactly right. The Romans did it, and it was a disaster. There's a great book out, Are We Rome? I'd recommend that if you're interested in it, you can take a look at. But it didn't work out very well for the Roman Empire.
Yeah, and honestly, that clashes with this purported deportation policy and not letting in immigrants. So it seems like a cascade failure on all fronts.
Immigrants, but only if they'd serve in the military, which makes it very, very mercenary.
Yeah, very mercenary, and like then you'd have to come up with a way to support their families who are also immigrants and going to be living inside the United States. It just seems like a huge mess and a cascade failure that there doesn't really seem to be any way out of.
Nope.
Okay, cool. And finally, my final question for you is there a mechanism within the bounds of executive authority where the president could deploy National Guard forces in, like, honestly, tactical operations on potentially American citizens in the name of his deportation policy? Because people say that could set a precedent for like the implementation of soft martial law.
Yeah, I think that if he declared a state of emergency or a martial law, that he could. There's a thing that's going to help to offset that is governors who've already said that they won't have their National Guard participate in that. So there's going to be an issue there. But I think that he's going to try to do it, and it depends what who the Secretary of Defense is and who the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs is that will determine it. I think he'll try it. I think there's every reason. I mean, he said he'll try it.
Yeah, I get.
If you read Project 2025 too, mm-hmm. It's in there. I mean, he said that he'll try it.
Well, we'll just see if our institutions are strong enough to resist it.
That's it. We have the weakening of the institutions. I'm deeply concerned with the Senate and whether they give up their right to advise and consent. And I think that the court, especially the Supreme Court, is now compromised. So we have institutions that are weakened in the second Trump administration.
Well, and they're going to do, it seems like his cabinet and his supporters are going to do everything to undermine that. So we'll see if we can last another 4 years. I'm not sure the Democratic Party is capable of saving people for what they expect to be coming. So Again, it's going to be a wild 4 years. I guess for people in the global South, there's one silver lining about the decline of U.S. Imperium. It's that we have a massive military problem. And it seems like instead of turning outward, it's going to turn inward. So bad for Americans, potentially better for other people. We'll see in that generalizing statement.
The global South will also be impacted more acutely by climate change than we will.
Yeah. So, yes, everyone loses. Yeah. Well, cheery conversation, General. Thank you so much for coming on. I know the recruiting crisis is a silver lining for a lot of people, also disturbing for others, and it's kind of a thorny subject. And we appreciate you and your expertise coming and laying it out for the audience.
My pleasure.
All right, y'all. That was Major General Dennis Laich, and I will link his book and his articles in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next Monday. Don't know what the subject is going to be. Something wild always happens over the weekend. Cheers, y'all, and see you on the next one.